And I want to start with a quote from Paul Kingsnorth. Some of you, do you know Paul Kingsnorth? Some of you may have heard of him. Last week you heard of him. Yes, somebody recommended his wonderful book that's just out, Against the Machine. Paul is a eco-activist and journalist, and a recent convert in, say, last sort of 6 years or so to Christianity. And I'll give you a quote from, he was on the Seen and Unseen podcast a little while ago, and this is something he says on that, and I'll read it to you. He says, "The more I thought about it, if you're looking at the environmental crisis and you start saying, well, why is this happening? And then you cycle through a lot of questions, and if you keep asking the questions, you say, well, maybe it's politics. Maybe we need someone else in power. And then you realize it's not that. And then you say, well, maybe we need a revolution. Well, that's not going to happen," he says. "And anyway, we'd probably make it worse. So maybe it's about capitalism. Yes, but it's bigger than that as well. Maybe it's about industrialism. Well, it sort of is, but it's even bigger than that." And you keep going down and down and down, and you realize that the crisis is not technological or economic or political, it's cultural, which means actually it's spiritual, because it's about our relationship with the rest of life and what we think a human is and what we think nature is and what we think the world is. And then that's a theological question, that's a spiritual question. So that's Paul Kingsnorth's thoughts. And I would like to, in this time together, help equip you, if I can, to have conversations about the environment and nature with friends and colleagues, family, that do just what Paul Kingsnorth talks about, that get beyond the superficial arguments, maybe about technology or politics or economics, though those are important things, and I'm sure if you have lectures on those, they are very important things. But beneath those, he says, lie deeper spiritual questions, and questions about, as he says, our relationship with the rest of life, questions about what we think a human is, questions about what we think nature is and what the world is. So in this talk, I'm not going to give you arguments about why we should care for the environment and care for the natural world. I'm not going to kind of give you arguments to convert people who don't care about climate change, etc. Rather, what I want to do is help you in conversations with people who do care and love nature and are worried about the damage that we're doing to our world, people with whom you probably share a love of this amazing world God has given us, and to think about how those conversations can point to Jesus Christ. So that's what I want to try and do, and I think that actually I would love it if we ended up at a place where we could see that the gospel of Jesus Christ actually gives us the best reasons for environmental care and conservation. And I'm going to argue that the gospel provides a basis for a better environmentalism, better than any other worldview of the natural world. And that biblical Christianity, properly understood, is the most pro-matter, in other words, in favor of the material. It's the most pro-earth and pro-nature worldview out there. And that faith in Jesus Christ gives us coherent reasons to care for the environment, and much better reasons than other worldviews that are commonly associated with environmentalism. So that's where we're going to go, and I want to start just by thinking, I guess, in the best place to start with in apologetics, which is connecting with people. I think that's what we need to do first, is build points of connection and questions. The biblical God, as I'm sure other people at Cambridge Apologetics have told you, is a God who asks questions. You think of when Adam and Eve have eaten the fruit, God comes to them with wonderful questions. Where are you? Who told you that? And what is this that you have done? G.K. Chesterton called Jesus the stranger who asks questions. So our apologetics should start with connecting with people and with the questions that we ask. And so I want to start by just saying that what we should begin with is what we share with people that are not Christians but love the environment. And that's where our conversations should start, I think, with a love of nature, or as we would call it, I think as Christians, creation. And start with that intuitive sense that we all have and that we all share of a connection to the natural world, an experience of nature that we share that is maybe hard to express, but often people reach for words like wonder and awe, beauty, and then even might say reverence for this thing that I'm encountering, a sacredness even, that sense. And then it often evokes in us gratitude. So many people, when they encounter a beautiful sunset, or this is my wife on when we were doing a pilgrimage walk up in Northumberland, and we found this beautiful Hethpool Linn to sit next to. And you experience, don't you, when you find a place like this, just gratitude, saying thank you, a feeling of it. And this is something we all share as human beings, though modern technological society has made us increasingly blind to it. And from this sense of reverence and for nature, I think we would also share with many people the desire to care well for this precious and beautiful gift that has been given to us in the face of things like climate change, species loss, and habitat destruction. So that is, I think, the point of connection that we should make with people. And then that leads to a question, I think, why? Why do we feel this connection with nature? Why this reverence and awe, this love, this need to care well? Where does it come from, and what makes sense of it? And those are the questions that Paul Kingsnorth asks in that podcast. What is our relationship with the rest of life? These are the great questions we can ask people. Where are we as human? What are we as human beings? What is nature? What is this world in which we find ourselves? So what I want to do this evening is just explore, hopefully fairly briefly, 3 possible answers to these questions, and some of the most common explanations for this sense we have of the sacredness and the reverence for nature. And these are the ones that I'm going to explore, I think some of the most common in our culture. So materialism, pantheism, and Christianity, and this is a bit like your A-level compare and contrast these three things. But they are stories in a sense. They are stories. Each one is a story of what is, how things are here, what is there, what is our relationship with nature. And I want to ask these 3 questions about each of these stories, and then just sort of to compare and see what each one has to say. So the first question is, what meaning and value do they ascribe to nature? What meaning does this story give to nature? Secondly, what is the role of humanity in relationship to nature? And thirdly, what motivation does each story give for the selfless care for the natural world that's necessary if we aren't to continue to destroy our planet? So meaning, the role of humanity, and motivation. And I think these are good questions as we get into conversation with our friends and neighbors that we can ask. Meaning, the role of humanity, and the motivation for selfless creation care. So I'm going to think about those in turn with just these 3 worldviews, and that will basically be the majority of our time. So I'm going to start with materialism. So materialism, I'm sure you are aware, has been the dominant story of Western culture for the last 200 years or so. And the story goes a bit like this, doesn't it? There is no God, there's no creator, there's nothing divine, nothing sacred about the universe. There is only matter. There's atoms and physical forces and time and chance. And that is an explanation for everything that exists. The universe started with a big bang and will probably end in a big crunch. So this is the story of what some people have called a disenchanted universe. So there's no enchantment in it. There's nothing sacred, nothing divine. So let's go back to our 3 questions and then look at how this story answers those questions. So the first one is, what meaning or value does this story ascribe to nature? And you've got to say, within this story, nature has no intrinsic meaning. There's no meaning in it. It's just an accident of material processes. In fact, there can really be no values or meaning in it if everything is only matter. So the only value or meaning nature can have is if we decide to give it one as human beings. It's not an intrinsic, that would be an extrinsic. We would impose it on nature. So we may choose to give nature meaning, but if everything is matter and time and chance, then meaning is really arbitrary. So some may choose to sentimentalize nature, but we can equally choose, in fact, that's what we do, to see the meaning of nature as a resource for humans. We can choose to see it any way we like. But the way we tend to do it is as a resource, a storehouse of commodities that we can use to human ends. So that's the first one. Then secondly, what's the role of humanity in relationship to nature? Bertrand Russell, in his famous essay, A Free Man's Worship, says this about human beings within this worldview of materialism. He said, "Man is the product of causes which had no provision of the end they were achieving. His origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and his beliefs are but the outcome of an accidental collocation of atoms." So that will be his, and it goes on. I won't read it all, but it gets bleaker and bleaker. So what Bertrand Russell is saying, within this materialistic story, we are the outcome of an accidental collocation of atoms. We are accidental life forms in a meaningless universe. So far, we are the most evolved product of the genetic code, whose only value, Richard Dawkins would tell us, is its own survival. We are biological survival machines. So we have no role in nature other than perhaps our own survival. So what motivation does this give for caring for the natural world? What motivation does it give? Well, I think the only real motivation that you can get from materialism is what you would call utility. In other words, the usefulness of the material world, of nature, for our own ends. So the only motivation we have really within this worldview is to care for the earth, is because if we don't care for it, we're all going to die, which is something that we're increasingly becoming aware of. Why humanity dying is a bad thing, materialism cannot answer, but we feel it intuitively. And I think it's this fear that drives much of the current concern for earth care, which is why anxiety is actually one of the strongest motivations that people feel today for caring for the earth. And now there's this condition called climate anxiety, which is where especially young people are very anxious about the future because we are destroying the earth's resources at such a vast rate. And I think these things are the natural outcome. Anxiety is the natural outcome of a materialistic worldview. This motivation is maybe also why a lot of contemporary environmentalism is focused on technological solutions to the environmental crisis, because the hope is that through technology we can continue to live our consumeristic modern lifestyles without having to change at all. And so there's hope in technology. It places its hope in technology. None of these answers, I think, to these questions, 3 questions, gives an explanation for why we experience awe and wonder in the face of the natural world, why we see beauty, and why we feel something sacred in the world around us. Which is why I think the second story we're going to think about now, which is pantheism, is gaining a lot of traction in the environmental movement. So the second one we're thinking about is pantheism. You may be familiar with that word or not, but I'll explain. So pantheism is basically the story of sacred nature. So materialism is the idea of nature just as matter. Pantheism is the story of sacred nature. It comes from two root words. Pan means everything, and theism is God. And that's basically what it is. Everything is God. So pantheism is the belief that the universe is divine, and divinity and the universe are the same thing. In the pantheistic story, there's no transcendent God, a God that is beyond nature. God is the sum total of everything in the universe. Everything is a part of the divine, and there's no distinction in it between a creator and a creation. So in this story, nature is not just matter, but it's re-enchanted with spirit or divinity, which explains why we humans have this intuitive sense of the sacredness of nature. It would explain very well why we feel that sacredness. And pantheism can take many, many different forms today, and I think it's a really growing idea. You could think of poetic expressions in the past of some of the romantic poets would be a form of pantheism. The American transcendentalists like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, they would be pantheists. I don't know if anyone's ever got into deep ecology. Do you know that phrase? Deep ecology, which has its roots in a kind of monistic Hinduism. The Gaia hypothesis, that would be a pantheistic idea of that the whole Earth is sort of one big organism, really, where everything's functioning together. And films like Avatar, for example, would have popularized that idea very strongly. And then there's a growing trend among what I call sort of postmodern paganism of pantheism, with its roots. People are looking back to Viking or Saxon mythologies as a way of kind of re-enchanting the universe. So the story of pantheism can give answers to the questions in this way. So here are the questions again. What meaning or value does this story ascribe to nature? So the story of pantheism would say nature has intrinsic value because it's divine. It is sacred. So that's actually a much closer answer, we'll see, to the Christian answer than materialism is. And so we may find actually we have more in common with our pantheistic friends, maybe than our materialistic ones. So nature has intrinsic value. Humans, secondly, we are part of nature. We're not in a privileged position, but we're just one tiny piece of the kind of the oneness of being, and maybe the most conscious part of that. And what motivation to selfless care for nature? Well, we're motivated to care because we're all part of a oneness of divinity. So caring for nature is caring for ourselves. However, I think if you push a little bit deeper in pantheism, you may not find it giving quite as robust answers for environmentalism as it first appears. The word pantheism stimulates care of nature with a spiritual connotation. It uses the word theism. But is it more than a motivation word? Does it really give an adequate basis for environmentalism? I think there are two reasons that it doesn't. And the first is because the idea that God is everything causes what some people call a flattened ontology. In other words, it flattens the being of everything into a uniform oneness. So pantheism secures an equal treatment for everything in nature on the basis of making everything equally divine. But what that means is the tree is God, the flower is God, I am God, that's okay so far. The influenza virus is God, the malaria parasite is God, not quite so good anymore, is it? The plague bacteria is God. So is calling everything really God, really giving things intrinsic value? The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer put it this way: to call the world God is not to explain it. It is only to enrich our language with a superfluous synonym for the word world. So he's really saying to call the world God is just saying the world is world. So he's really questioning, does pantheism actually really differ from materialism? Richard Dawkins put it this way in his usual provocative style. He said, pantheism is sexed up atheism. It's sexed up atheism. Does it really differ from materialistic atheism? And does the word God really mean something? There's a second reason, though, that pantheism doesn't give an adequate basis for environmentalism, which flows from the first reason, and that's this. If everything is divine, if everything is God, how then do we make any decisions as what to do environmentally and what not to do? How can pantheism demand of us anything specific to do? If both the beautiful sunset is God and the deadly plague bacteria are God, then why do we decide to enjoy one and fight the other? Antibiotics in a pantheistic worldview become ecocide. You're killing off millions of organisms when you take an antibiotic. So I don't think it gives actually an adequate basis for environmental action. And the only conclusion we can perhaps reach, given that it is our species that is messing up the planet so much, is that the planet Earth would be better off without us, and that we're this destructive virus in the Gaia planetary organism that needs to be got rid of. But even this conclusion is suspect if we say that why should we be got rid of if we are divine too? So I don't think pantheism actually gives us a really good cause for environmentalism. And so I'm going to move on to biblical Christianity and just think about that. So those were materialism, pantheism, and I want to explore this final story of biblical Christianity. So if you have read quite a bit around environmental care and ecology, you will know that there's a recent history of blaming Christianity for the ecological crisis. It goes back to a famous article written by Professor Lynn White in 1966 called The Historical Roots of Our Ecologic Crisis, in which he basically blames Christianity as the cause of that. And I have to say, sadly, some of Professor White's criticisms of Christianity hit home. And not so much for some of the reasons he gives, but I would say because I think many Christians live as functional materialists. In other words, we live as if nature is just matter. And so I think actually many Christians have a sub-biblical view of nature and our relationship with nature. Sadly, modernity often is the salt and light of the church rather than the other way around. So what I hope to show you, so that you could show your non-Christian friends and colleagues, neighbors, is that biblical Christianity gives more coherent reasons for environmental care than either materialism or pantheism. And it gives the best reasons for hope in our current environmental crisis. So that's where I want to finish. And I'm going to start in maybe a slightly odd place, but actually start with this amazing passage that the Apostle Paul wrote in his letter to the Colossians. And he wrote this around only 30 years after Jesus had actually walked the earth. But this is what he says about this person who 30 years ago had walked and talked with people that Paul knew and ate with them and had died on a cross and risen again. And he says this about Jesus. He says, he, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. So this person that walked the earth only 30 years ago is the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, seen and unseen. All things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile, to bring together himself all things in heaven and earth by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. So this is a really astonishing thing for someone to say. I think it is completely astonishing that this person who walked the earth is the creator God, for whom and in whom and through whom all things are made, who holds all things together, is quite astonishing. I really wonder what made Paul come to that conclusion and other Christians at that time. So the Christian story begins with this God, and the God who the Apostle John tells us is love. He is separate from his creation. So unlike pantheism, there is a creator and then a creation. Yet creating a universe out of his love, through his word and through his spirit, as the first chapter tells us, a universe that he gifts with real otherness and real being. The particulars of the universe are not God, the trees, the flowers, they are real other things, but they are bound up and have their being in the love of God. So the Bible could not be more positive about the material world. I actually don't know another worldview that is more positive about the material world than Christianity is. In the first chapter of the Hebrew Bible, 7 times we are told that the creation is good and very good. And that is a value statement. So it has intrinsic value in its goodness. The Judeo-Christian perspective is the most pro-matter, pro-nature, pro-earth perspective there is. So let's go back to our 3 questions then and see what the Christian biblical worldview says. So what meaning or value does the story ascribe to nature? Matter, nature, creation has value and meaning, as I've just said. It's the good creation of a loving creator. It's imbued with beauty, with dignity, with harmony. It is created, as Paul says, by and for God. It is shining with his glory. And I love this wonderful quote in this book by Norman Wisber called From Nature to Creation. And he's saying how in this book, nature has been disenchanted to become nature. It's actually creation. But I love this quote where he says, creation is the visual, fragrant, audible, touchable, and tasteable manifestation of God's love. The place where God's desire that others be and be well finds earthly expression. It's beautiful. You can't get a more pro-earth, pro-matter. So in the Bible, nature is certainly de-divinized. It's not God, but is not desacralized in the sense of sacred, not meaning divine, but rather meaning associated with the divine. For the creation is caught up in the love of God. So, second question, what then is humanity's place in creation? Well, human beings, we are created as part of creation. So again there we might have something in common with a pantheistic worldview. We are created on the 6th day, the same day as the animals. We don't have our own day, which is very interesting. We are not, I would say, some people might disagree, but I would say we're not the pinnacle of creation, because actually the pinnacle of creation is rest. On the 7th day, it is harmony and the beauty of the harmony of the shalom that God has given his creation. But we are given a special calling within this creation. The Bible tells us we're made in the image of God. So we're called to rule over creation as God's representatives. And what does this look like? Well, I think we see what it looks like in the fact that God places the first human beings in a garden. Humans are created to be gardeners. And when you think what a garden is a wonderful mixture of nature and the human, isn't it? Of the natural world and human civilization. That's what a garden is. And in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, God commands them to work and take care of the garden. And actually in the Hebrew, the words are much closer to serve and protect. I know that some US police forces have that, don't they, as their serve and protect. But it's interesting, we are there to serve the creation and protect it. So humanity is created in this very special role to serve and protect the harmony of creation, which is to God's glory, to love creation and care for it. And it's our failure to do that is the cause of our ecological crisis. If there is one cause for the human despoilation of nature, it's our failure to live within the limits. And in fact, that's actually the biblical story in the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3, is that human beings don't want to live within the limits that God sets. And when he says, don't eat that fruit because it's not good for you, they grasp it and take it and consume it, hoping for power and autonomy, which is really the roots of our environmental crisis, go right back to that moment, our alienation from God. And somehow that also affects the whole creation in a way that I don't quite understand, but it does, so that creation is not all that God made it to be. And this is really where the good news for environmentalism comes in. This is a painting by Lindsay Farrell, an Australian artist, and I'll leave you to look at that as I cover this last section. But this is where the good news comes, because as Paul wrote to the Colossians, the one for whom and by whom the creation came into being entered the creation as the man Jesus Christ, coming to find us. That's the gospel. To live and die and rise again, not just so humanity might be saved out of the mess we've made, but as the Bible bears witness to reconcile. Remember those verses in Colossians, it says to reconcile everything in heaven and on earth through his blood on the cross. So I love this painting because it shows that his arms are not only stretched wide over humanity, but over all the creation as well. And the Bible bears witness to that again and again and again. And most powerfully, the way that the biblical story ends is not with the destruction of the earth and an escape into heaven, but with the recreation of the earth. So Revelation 21 tells us actually that the final reality is the recreation and a marriage of heaven and earth in a harmonious new creation. So Christianity is actually the most hopeful worldview there is for the earth, because it actually ends up with God redeeming the earth. Not hopeful in our own cleverness, but in what God will do. So what then is the motivation for Christians to care for creation? That's our third question. Well, the Christian writer and agrarianist Wendell Berry, I love the way he says it all turns on affection. Have you read Wendell Berry? If you haven't, you should. He's an amazing writer. But I like that he says it all turns on affection, which means that Christian environmental care doesn't start with anxiety or with the equality of everything in nature, but with love. That's what he's saying. It starts with love. Christian care for the creation is motivated by love. Love for God, for our gracious God who's given us this amazing gift of being and the wonderful gift of nature and sent us an amazing Savior in Jesus Christ. And trust, not trust in ourselves, but in the one who holds all things together. So I think for Christians, many Christians, this first of all means repentance and dying to our greed and limitless consumption. But more than this, Christianity is not a call to environmental legalism. It's a call to be reconciled to God and then to join God in what he's doing to redeem creation. So Francis Schaeffer, who founded the L'Abri communities that I'm part of, I love this quote. He said this in a wonderful book. I'll show you some resources at the end that you might like to read. Wonderful book called Pollution and the Death of Man, which he actually wrote in 1970, which was pretty far out for evangelical Christians to think about the environment. So he says this: on the basis there is going to be total redemption in the future, not only of man, but of all creation, the Christian who believes the Bible should, and I love this, it should, with God's help and in the power of the Holy Spirit, treat nature now in the direction of the way nature will be then. So he says that's what we should be doing. That is our calling as Christians, basically to play our part in the redeeming of nature, in what he would call the substantial healing of nature. And in my book about called What on Earth is Heaven, I kind of qualify that and I say in our square inch of the earth, because we can't save the whole planet, but we can do something in our square inch. And this is one of my last slides. This is what I've tried doing in my square inch. Does anyone know what those are? Close, not, yeah, they're related, well, they're, yeah, like swifts. House martins, well done. Like swallows, yeah, they're like swallows, aren't they? Cousins of swallows. And these, I didn't take this photograph, it's a lovely photograph from the House Martin Conservation Charity. We have a nest outside our window in our house in Hampshire, in the Labrie community. And I grew up in a city, so I didn't really grow up with nature very much, but I've loved nature. And these are the birds that I've come to love. And in my square inch, because they nest outside my house, outside our bedroom window. And they're also birds that migrate. They fly in winter, that they go in about September. And I always watch for them to come back and watch for the first house martins to arrive. I know many people get a bit of seasonal affective disorder. You get very excited when the first house martins are coming back. In month? Ours come in May, yeah, about May, yeah.
Before the swallows?
They come, yes, round about the same time, and before the swifts, I think, yeah. And they're beautiful birds. They're like spitfires that just fly and they feed on the wing. And one of the things I've done from falling in love with these birds is reading about them and realizing they build these nests out of several thousand globules of mud, which they collect. And one of the reasons that their numbers are declining rapidly is because there's no sources of mud around anymore, because we just concreted over everything. So I've made a big mud patch on my lawn to provide mud with them, and they feed on insects, and of course insects are decreasing as well. So I've planted, and in the Labrie property, lots of wildflower areas so that we've got more insects. And I was really pleased to say that we had more house martins this year than the last year. So that could be weather and other conditions, but something's going on. Anyway, okay, so I could talk to you about house martins forever. I geek out on house martins. So this is our calling. And I would say this calling actually is a calling to evangelism as well. We welcomed at Labrie the ecologist writer Haddon Turner a little while ago, and he said this: the greatest need for the environment is evangelism and personal holiness, since the holy person is a substantial blessing to creation. I like the way he put that, to see people turn to Christ, because when people turn to Christ, and actually that is the witness that Christians have given over the ages, but now often neglected. In the Welsh revival of 1904 to 5, it's said that you could tell when a man had been converted by the way he treated his pit pony. That there was a radical change there. William Wilberforce, famous for his work in abolishing slavery, was also a founding member of what became the RSPCA, and also the RSPCC as well. So he really cared about the creation. The reformers sometimes get a bad rap but they actually had a wonderful connection with nature. And a friend of mine who comes to our lectures, who's written a really wonderful book on the reformers' and nonconformists' attitude to animals, sent me a wonderful quote about a 17th century reformer talking about how we should not even kill a fly because they are part of the glory of God. And I just want to commend to you, probably some of you know Our Rocha already, which is a contemporary work of Christian conservation. And its founder, Peter Harris, he says the gospel is not just written on human hearts, but on the landscape. And this is a wonderful project that they've been doing in Lebanon through war and over many times. And this is one of the last remaining freshwater marshes. I wish I could show you the picture, because I couldn't find a before and after picture. But before their work, it was just a desert. And now they've managed to turn it into this beautiful, beautiful wetlands again. And you can see the children coming to learn about nature in the picture down there. So the gospel of Jesus Christ provides meaning and value to creation. It gives a role for humanity within creation. And it provides the ultimate motivation for the selfless care of creation now, which is love. So as Paul Kingsnorth says, where we started, the environmental crisis is not a problem of technology or of politics or of economics. It's bigger than all those. It's a spiritual problem. And that requires a spiritual solution. And the solution is the person of the incarnate, died and risen Jesus Christ. Creator, I should have said risen, creator, Jesus Christ. Good. That's how are we doing time? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Jim, thank you so much. We now have the opportunity to ask you any questions that we have. It might be something from what Jim's been sharing from. You might want to ask more about his birds. I want to hear more about the mud and the house martins.
Yeah.
But I'll come around with the microphone, so if you have a question, do stick up a hand. And we'll do the microphone partly for the sake of the recording, so that we can all hear each other as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi.
Really, really helpful and interesting,
Thank you.
Jim. I wanted to suggest that a pantheist might say, if you said, where you said it creates this flattened ontology, and so we're not, how can you decide what is right or wrong? Because everything has value.
Yeah.
They might say, no, but it's obvious. If something is beautiful, then it needs to be protected. So, you know, corals that are being whitened, that's obviously wrong, because it's losing all the variety and beauty and colour and life that's on those reefs. So they might say, you know, that's disingenuous. Of course we know what's obvious to us. So how would you connect that with where that motivation comes from?
Yeah, that's a really good question, I mean, I guess we should start by affirming the beauty of things, shouldn't we? And that is a real human experience, isn't it? Experiencing beauty. But I wonder whether, you know, really in a pantheistic worldview, I don't know if you can make a distinction between beauty and ugliness, actually. I think that would be I'm sure most people would say that, wouldn't they? And they'd say, that's why I love the sunset and I don't like the plague bacteria. But I'm not sure that actually is defensible within a pantheistic worldview, because if everything is divine, then the ugliness is divine as well. Who are you to say, you know, from your human point of view, that the ugliness is bad or wrong, you know, because as well, like, your point of view as a human is not a privileged, do you see what I mean? It's not a privileged point of view either, is it? Because everything else is just as divine as you are. So I think that's the problem that people are getting at when you flatten everything into basically it's what you might call at its root, it's a monistic point of view. Do you know what monism means? That everything is one. Monism is one. Everything is oneness, and I think when you do that, then you lose categories of things. You know, like ugly and beautiful, or good and bad, even. So I think beauty itself probably belongs much more strongly in a Christian worldview than it does in a pantheistic one. Persuade you. That's good. I did do a talk on beauty a little while ago. I'll have to think more about that. That's good. I think that if beauty is like really valid, I mean, you know, I think one thing is, obviously as human beings we all experience beauty, and then we could say, why do we all experience beauty? What is it that's happening? And when you begin to think what beauty is, it's a very interesting, I think beauty is an experience. You're experiencing something that is real in the object, and it seems not just to be a human projection. Actually, we were just talking about Ian McGilchrist, the neuroscientist. He would say actually that, in fact, we share a huge amount beauty is not actually in the eye of the beholder. We mostly share a very common experience of beauty as human beings, even across Eastern and Western cultures. So it's an experience, and I think as a Christian you would say beauty is real because God has created a world with beauty in it, has given beauty as a gift. So we're experiencing something of that. And people often talk about as well that beauty comes to meet you rather than, it's almost like something that it almost, what would I say, knocks you back, doesn't it, rather than you having to kind of generate it. So it seems to be something that is really there as a real category that we experience as human beings. And I would say that is, you know, to make it, I don't think materialism can explain it as a real thing, and I don't think pantheism either. And I think as Christians we can say, no, it is a real thing. I suppose you would say because, you know, at the root we have a beautiful God who has created this, creation in his own image. Is that good enough? I don't know. Helpful, yeah. I'll have to think a bit more about it, but
okay.
Yeah.
I'd like you to help me with the gospel conversation with somebody
Yeah.
who's not a persuaded Christian at all.
Yeah.
Perhaps as a materialist without really realizing it.
Yeah.
I'm on a walk with them, and
Yeah.
there are beautiful things that I'm looking at.
Yeah.
How do I go from stunning oranges in Wandlebury Country Park to a conversation about Jesus, please?
That's a good.
Help me have the gospel conversation.
Yeah.
I'm persuaded completely by your analysis.
Yeah.
But I'm struggling
Great.
how to get.
That's a good. What's your name?
Tim.
Tim, that's right, Tim. Yeah, great question, Tim. So the question is, how do you get from there? I think it's it's got to be by asking questions, hasn't it? First of all.
All the best questions.
Yeah, so, well, maybe we can help generate questions together. Go on, let's help generate some questions together. So I think, first of all, you've got to affirm, haven't you, the experience of beauty. Say, like, yes, this is wonderful, isn't it, that we're enjoying it.
A dialogue with a not yet persuaded person. I could be that.
Yeah.
It's all chance.
Oh, if they don't, okay.
Yeah, I'm sure you enjoy it. I enjoy a drizzly November day.
Right. So they're not persuaded about beauty then, it's just all chance. What do people think? What do you think would be questions? Do you want to use the mic? You can use the microphone so that the recording can do it.
Actually, in the life that we lead, we work at different speeds. We have times in our life when we're very busy, our mind is very occupied with things.
Right, yeah.
But often people, through circumstances, are put in a different situation where they have to slow down.
Right.
Often when people have gone literally through trauma of war, serious operations where they've nearly died and survived and things like that, often putting people into a natural environment, like when they build these gardens, for people in hospices and things like that. I have friends who are blind who will experience a garden in a different way. But somehow nature and creation speaks to people, but people have to also slow down and take it in. Yeah. Because I know it's even. What questions do you ask? Well, how can you get people to realise that sometimes they have to slow down? Because there's a huge market also in kind of mindfulness and spirituality and things like that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting. When I was thinking about, this is more on beauty than on, is you have to give your attention to something, don't you, to actually see beauty. So it's, that's when we live in the built-up modern urban environments. And sometimes what I do with students that come to L'Abri is I like to do my tutorials walking, and there's some military land near us which is open, and so there's no cars and there's lots of birds there, and I'll take them on a bird walk, and we'll go and sit somewhere and wait for a while and watch, and some people are just so caught up in their own heads. They don't see anything. So that might be better maybe than asking questions, is actually leading them into an experience of something and say, let's just sit here for a while and see.
I can just imagine a very frustrated person going, when can I have my phone back?
Yeah, well, Jesus says, don't cast pearls before swine, doesn't he? Sometimes, that's the thing, isn't it? In some ways there needs to be I mean, Jesus talks a lot about opening people's eyes, doesn't he? And we can certainly be very blind. But I think most people, I don't often find people like that. I mean, even ardent atheists are, they love nature, walking, the experience, the sunrise, the challenge of, walking across the Pennines, I would say.
Are there gospel or biblical examples of huge appreciation of nature? I guess the Psalms have got it.
Yeah, Psalm 104 would be, a classic psalm all about nature. You think of God's, when God speaks to Job, and that's also one of the most wonderful passages. There's a whole. I'll show you some resources. Actually, I've got some resources here in a minute. But this book called Bible in Ecology by Richard Bauckham is excellent if you want to look at all the biblical passages that deal with nature. And I mean, there's fascinating things you see in the Bible to do with nature, such as actually, nature being affected by human sin, such as the land saying, "I will vomit you out," which is one of the things that we are experiencing, I think, today. And the trees and the mountains, it says in the Psalms often, when God returns with justice, the trees and the mountains will clap, the trees will clap their hands and the mountains will sing for joy. So it's interesting, there's actually so much in the Bible, and there are bits in the Bible that are translated wrong. For example, if you read the story of Noah, it often says the covenant with humanity. But if you read the text, when they put the little titles in the Bible, but if you read the text, it's actually the covenant with all creation. It's interesting. So actually, Richard Bauckham's book there, The Bible in Ecology, is really good for helping you to see actually, the place of nature in the biblical narrative.
What do you find beautiful? Would be a good question.
Shall I do you want to let someone else just come in if someone else wants to, but you don't have to, but sorry, and I will come back to it.
No, that was the suggestion.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to...
Oh, okay, that's a suggestion. Yeah, what do you find beautiful? Yeah, sorry, that is a good question, Tim. Yeah, I thought you were asking me.
Yeah, that's great. I was going to sort of help us all continue with Tim's challenge of playing out the conversation.
Yeah, what questions do you think would... Yeah.
I suppose if somebody was that cynical and one's walking along and saying, "Isn't it beautiful?" and they say no, then I suppose one could say, well, actually, I would have thought most people think this is amazing. Why do you think that is? And
right.
So it's no longer them, but it's humanity in general.
Yeah.
But then what would be the response, do you think, from a materialist, say?
Yeah.
Because I think, who wants to then say, well, beauty is just in the eye of the beholder. I wonder if you could unpick, or what would sort of the classic materialist, whether it's a hardcore evolutionist account of survival, how does the account of beauty relate to survival, perhaps?
Yeah.
Or how do we get back to them on that one?
Yeah. Yeah. Are you asking me the question or asking us to think about it? Yeah. 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 Yeah, I mean, I think, as I would say, that I don't think the experience of beauty necessarily finds a settled home in a materialistic worldview. And yet, I'm not saying people that are atheists just can't experience beauty. Of course they will, because they're made in the image of God, just as that we are made to respond to this, and to actually interact with this wonderful gift. I think it's a universal, really human experience. So I think, by doing that, you affirm the experience, but it's kind of, for me, it seems like asking, where does this find its most settled home? In which view of reality? Does it make sense in your own view? And you can explore, and if someone says, well, beauty's in the eye of the beholder or something, or it's just a survival mechanism, but it seems that, beauty is superfluous. Do you know what I mean? It's a superfluous experience. Yeah, it's unnecessary. And you could even look at birds, and you could say, like, people say, well, evolutionists would say, yeah, but, birds, the reason birds are so colourful, for example, is to attract a mate. But it still doesn't answer, why do we find them beautiful? Do you see what I mean? They're not attracting us as a mate. Why do we experience that as beautiful? And of course, the sunset is not trying to do anything. It just is. So, yeah, and actually, I mean, I've just did a lecture on Ian McGilchrist, but he has a really wonderful section on the experience of beauty in his book, The Matter with Things, which is, actually, he does, again, shows you how universal the experience is, and it's not in the eye of the beholder at all, because you could challenge someone who's a materialist to say, yeah, but then, you know, is it, I don't know, you know, is a child starving to death in Africa beautiful? And if I found it beautiful, you would actually want to say there's something wrong with you. You wouldn't say it's just, you know, do you know what I mean? And so, yeah, if I do find that beautiful, what is wrong with me? So those are some of the things I would think about, yeah.
Thank you.
Anything, yeah.
I
should have brought my talk on beauty.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, what would you say to someone who just can't get past, would say, yes, you've made a good case for this, but what about not just the destruction that Christians have done in the past, but the fact that so many Christians would disagree with you? Like, which version of Christianity are they supposed to believe? How do you have that conversation?
Yeah, well, I guess that could be a really good opportunity to say, let's look at the Bible together and read the Bible together and actually see what it does say about creation. So again, Richard Baucham's book could be very good for helping you prepare that. But yeah, let's actually read the Bible together and look at what it says. Rather than, yes, there are so many Christians, I mean, particularly that's partly why I wrote my book called What on Earth is Heaven, that, you know, believe that the earth will all be destroyed and we'll all just, you know, go up to spiritualized heaven. So in the book I'm arguing, you know, actually the Bible talks about exactly the reverse process. It talks about heaven coming to earth and recreating the earth. So, yeah, did you want to come back with something? But I would say, do a Bible study.
No, I agree with you, but it just coming back to, these are fiercely argued biblical debates I guess they're seeing the ugliness of controversy in Christianity, or I guess I'm wondering how you navigate that.
I don't know if they are kind of fiercely argued biblical debates. I think there are, I would say there are a lot of Christians that are functional materialists or with a sub-biblical understanding of creation. I think when you look at the Bible, it's pretty clear, actually. And if you had that's not to say, can I also recommend this book called 6 Modern Myths? So he's got a chapter, Philip Sampson, there on the Christian responsibility for the environmental crisis, which is really excellent, where he looks at that myth, and he actually, explores, what an incredible myth it is, because actually it's that materialistic worldview that is much, much more responsible for the environmental crisis than a Christian one. And that's, absolutely the case. And when you look at the history of Christianity, you can think of people like St. Patrick or St. Francis. The reformers, as I mentioned, actually had an incredibly high view on the whole of, and it's actually a relatively recent kind of, late 19th and 20th century view, the kind of the destruction of the whole earth and things. So, yeah, but I think that could be great to just say, let's do a Bible study. Let's look at Genesis. Let's look at Psalm 104. Let's read through Job. Yeah. Great.
Thank you. Other questions?
Got another one.
Another slightly different one. What about, though, the fact that we begin with a garden but we end with a city in the Bible? What are we to make of that?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Are we concreting over the Garden of Eden?
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. That's something I talk about in the book that I've written. Think about that a bit. So I think one thing we note in the Christian story is that, it doesn't go back to a garden. So there are some worldview stories that would go back as if we begin again and as if nothing has ever happened. But the Christian story ends actually in a garden city when you read it. It's not just a city, it's a garden city. It has a river, it has trees that bear fruit. So again, I would say it's this wonderful sort of harmonious combination of human civilization and nature together. And returning to a garden would be really saying everything that's happened in human history is wrong and bad and a disaster, and we need to get back to a state of innocence. Whereas I think actually the Christian story is even though there's a lot of evil and wrong and injustice in it, that actually the history of the earth is important and it matters. And so one of the other things it says at the end of the Bible is in Revelation 22, it says the kings of the earth will bring their treasures into the city. And I kind of think that's saying the goodness of human civilization, the beauty, the creativity, the wonderful things that we have done and made are eternal and they will be there. It won't be as if nothing has ever happened, and the whole of the history of this earth has been negated. So, this wonderful picture, the garden city, and its beautiful things on the images of the fruit. It bears fruit every month, doesn't it? Is that what it says? Every month, I think it is. And the leaves of the trees are for the healing of the nations. So it's this wonderful harmony again. And that's, as opposed to the pantheistic story where you could end up with saying, well, we're the problem and we need to be got rid of. The Christian story is calling you to be part of the solution and saying, actually, at the end of time, there will be this amazing harmony of the human and nature, the natural world together. Thank you. That's a good question. Yeah.
Other questions?
While you're doing that, I'll just say these are some resources. So these are wonderful books that, the Circles and the Cross. Lauren Wilkinson is amazing professor of ecology at Regent College. Francis Schaeffer's Pollution and Death of Man is still really, really good. Get a second-hand copy on some. It's not dated and something else. And then I did a lecture recently at L'Abri called "Is God in Nature?" If you have a phone, that QR code I think works and will take you to it. And I'm thinking about, again, it's an expansion of this lecture, but I really try to think about what does it mean for the Christian God to be. Or actually I end up with saying, what does it mean that creation is in Christ? Think about the Bible says creation is in Christ. So I try to think about that and hopefully give you a really healthy picture of what it means for creation to be in Christ. Tim, you got another question. Yeah.
Ways we can be distinctively Christ-honoring, environmentally conscious, distinctive to our peers.
Yeah.
That might be gospel intentional and purposeful.
Yeah.
That somebody might say, gosh, I remember Jim, he was always
bird watching.
And it struck me, or whatever. Bird watching.
But not, yeah.
Any suggestions?
Yeah.
I'm going to pick up litter while I'm walking.
Yeah. I like the sense of that. You should think about your square inch of the world and what's going on in that already. Not try and save the world. Maybe start with something you love as well, or it could be an area or a park or something. One of the things we've done at L'Abri, which is really wonderful, is someone gave us a gift of money, so we were able to buy the field opposite L'Abri in the village where we live, and we've turned that into a conservation project. But one of the things we've done is made it open to anyone in the village to come and use and sit in and walk their dog in, and we got an area where we've built wooden sort of playthings and swings, and people in the village can bring their kids there. And I think that says something about the generosity of Christ, that we're not protecting this space just for ourselves, but we'll trust you to come into it and use it and enjoy it. And I think that's actually beginning to do something in our village about, these Christians, they're different, they're welcoming in. And it's formed lots of really good connections with people in our village that are not Christians but love conservation and you know, and nature, and there's opportunities then for conversations. It's one of the best things, isn't it, where conversations start is when you're working on something together. So we have a monthly work day where we invite, or work morning, we invite people from the village to come and join us. And it's just been a really good way to connect with people and begin to get to know them. And, you know, hopefully those kind of conversations just happen when you're working together. So, yeah, but you could think, I don't know if you, do other people got other thoughts on that? What about if you live in a city? Guerrilla gardening. Tell us about guerrilla gardening.
I don't know if it's a Christian thing, but find a little patch of scrubland.
Yeah.
Just, with no permission from anyone, just turn it into a beautiful bit of
right.
nature.
Plants some bulbs and because beauty, I think beauty is, it's amazing. I mean, sorry, we keep on going back to beauty, don't we? But beauty is deeply humanizing, isn't it? So creating a beautiful space is, and all kinds of things happen actually when you create beauty. I know that in urban areas, crime rates go down when you make the environment more beautiful. So yeah, I love that. Beauty is an apologetic, isn't it? Yeah.
I grew up in Belfast, which is a very urban city.
Yeah.
And a lot of the housing in Belfast was sort of not as nice as housing in Cambridge, with very humble houses back to back. But those sort of entries at the back of houses were very unsociable areas, and where you'd get, you know, men lurking and things like that. Yeah. But when neighbours started coming together and creating little green spaces. I've seen this happen in different cities, you know, to create a space, and say if you're a Christian living in an environment like that, you can get with your neighbours and try to encourage them, even if you plant pots, a few little chairs outside, you know, and to green those ugly areas. It changes how people are.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
You know? And I mean, Belfast has been regenerated since the peace process, and streets that, you know, I walked down where bomb explosions had happened and people had been injured. They've all now got pots of plants and trees and things like that. And, you know, Christians in Belfast are reaching out through working in the environment as well.
Yeah, people recognise it. Yeah, I was listening to on the radio a story. Now it's the author who wrote the book Wild Swans? Do you know about the Cultural Revolution? Yeah. And what's her name? Jung Chang. And she was telling a story. She said how during the Cultural Revolution, when she was a child in the school, the command came round from on high, and they said, tear up all the flowers. So the kids went all the way through the village and destroyed all the flowers, the children. And then the interviewer asked her, he said, why do you think they told you to do that? And she said, because beauty humanizes, it made us human. And so by destroying the flowers, making it just human-made environment, they were making us into machines, you know, and they could control. So I do think there's a great call, you know, an apologetic call for beauty, isn't there? And for the beauty of nature, yeah. Did you...
I worked as a gardener quite a while ago.
Yeah.
And there was a garden we did, and it was a front garden on a road.
Yeah.
And the owner, a couple of years later when I visited him, he said he's had so many people come by, and there was a woman in a wheelchair who would stop and look at his garden and the joy that it brought the people. And people who said they started taking that route, walking just to see the garden and the joy that it brought them.
Beautiful.
But there was a bit in the Bible that in Romans 1:20 that says God's eternal power and divine nature are clearly seen in creation, leaving people without excuse for not knowing him. So it's sort of the bit where it also says that God's put the law in our hearts. So people, even the Gentiles, they knew right from wrong. So somewhere it has been placed in us already. So even I think we are just there to plant seeds. God's there to make them grow. So we can't convert anybody. We can't bring anybody really to. We can just be there, and sometimes it's more listening to people's stories. And I think, being out in nature, like you say, that forms a connection somewhere.
And it makes a real connecting point with other people, doesn't it? It sounds like, I know someone that does that in their village, and their garden's right on the street, and this is in Holland, and people in the village, often stop and look, and they start conversations, and they get to know, and he'll show them around. And so it kind of, it's a wonderful way actually to meet our neighbours, isn't it? And also to offer them a gift as well, and that can be really, people think, well, why do they do this? And maybe you can explain that this is, I'm honouring my Creator in this garden. Great.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
So, quite presumptuous of me as the host.
No, that's good.
I was just struck by the conversation we were talking about the idea of working in a particular square inch, and was thinking about something I read by George Monbiot, the conservationist, columnist, author, and in some ways stands as a bit of a spectre into some of this material. I mean, he writes on the Gaia hypothesis, doesn't he? And I was remembering something that he wrote where he basically is doing his usual attack on neoliberalism and individualism, and saying that one of the things that we have, one of the mistakes that we've made is to think that we as individuals can contribute to anything. And what we need is to have systemic, you can see where he'd go from there. What we need is systemic change, and we need to push for government to do this or that. I just wonder that idea of working in your square inch. You see real attractiveness in that, but could also imagine somebody from that position effectively saying, well, it's lovely, but what impact will that actually have? I just wonder how we'd speak into that.
No, that's a great question. So, I mean, it's not necessarily an either-or hypothesis, is it? An either-or. You could do both and. But one of my problems, and it's obviously not the case in his case, but I think a lot of people who campaign, stop the oil or things like that, one of my questions is how much they actually love nature. I think a lot of activists are maybe motivated by something else, and I think as Christians it should start with love, as Wendell Berry says, it all turns on affection, and it should start, and everything we do should come out of love. Not of anger or bitterness or anxiety, because actually the thing we have that most people that are not Christians don't have is we have a God we can trust in, who holds all things together, and who has promised us, promised this good future. So out of that can come humility, that we can't change the world, but we can change our square inch. And it's the old story, isn't it? If everyone does something in their square inch, you can change quite a big area, can't you? So there's that. But I don't think it's wrong, working at another level. And some Christians may be really called to do that. But again, it's got to be done out of love, hasn't it, for creation. And one of the things, going back to Paul Kingsnorth, one of his criticisms, he's written that book called Confessions of a, not repentant, I keep wanting to say repentant, he doesn't use that word, where is it? Confessions of a Recovering Environmentalist. And that one of his criticisms of why he actually fell out of love with the environmentalist movement is that the environmentalist movement, when it's working at really big levels, that it's actually being co-opted by technology and by big business. And basically what it's trying to do is maintain our modern consumeristic lifestyles using technology as the answer. And his thing is actually what it's not doing is saying something else needs to change, which is inside us. And actually he was saying that before he was a Christian. But I think since he's become a Christian, he might have some new terms for what's wrong inside of us. Because, the Bible gives us a great explanation of what's happening inside us. And that's, our sin, our selfishness, our alienation from God, our lack of putting limits, our greed. And so I think that's one of the things, if I think as well, one of the things about being in our square inch is also asking how do we need to change, actually? What can we do as, in order to live lives where we're not living in that kind of limitless, and Francis Schaeffer once, our two problems, he says, are, I've got it in my notes. Let me just have a look. He says, there are two factors that lead to the destruction of our environment: money and time, or to say it another way, greed and haste. The question is, are we going to have an immediate profit and an immediate saving of time, or are we going to do what we really should do as God's children? I love that. So that's kind of, So.
Last question. This will be the last one.
Yeah. Tim.
Sorry, I've hogged this, but that's really okay. Fascinating. Are we undermining our evangelism by owning fast cars and traveling to the other side of the planet in aeroplanes?
That's a great question, yeah. Are we, yeah. Yeah, there may be a case. I mean, there was an architect student came to L'Abri, and he said, my church is like this utilitarian box. And it did have a garden outside, but they've just decided to concrete over the garden and turn it into a car park. And so you kind of say, like, what is that saying? Yeah, what is that saying to a watching world, as Francis Schaeffer would say, a watching world? What is it saying to a watching world? Going back to Peter Harris, the founder of A Rocha, said, that the gospel isn't just written on human hearts, but it's written in the landscape. And so, I agree with you. I mean, it might not be necessary taking flights and fast cars. And I love the way that, Peter Harris is very good at being non-prescriptive, and I said in my talk that I don't think we want to go to an environmental legalism, where like wearing you shouldn't wear leather shoes, or you should be a vegetarian or whatever. I think we may do those things out of a calling, and some people in A Rocha, for example, don't fly at all, and some will fly, but will offset that with, the ways you can offset flying. So I think we should definitely be asking God, what does this mean for me, in my situation, but not being legalistic about it. But again, thinking, I just want to go back to the thing, it all starts with love. So I think the combat of legalism is love. And so I would say, rather than saying, I mustn't take flights or do this, I mustn't do that, we should say, what should I love? That would be far more in line with Jesus Christ and his gracious gospel. So we should say, what are you calling me to love, rather than what are you calling me not to do as a first thing? Yeah.